and you're listening to Campus Public Safety Online from the National Center for Campus Public Safety. Before I introduce today's speaker, here's a brief orientation to the Adobe Connect interface we're using. Your browser right now is showing the title slide for today's talk. On the left side of your screen, you'll see a box labeled Questions and Comments where you can read and type messages. There's a tab labeled Everyone at the bottom of this box, and that's the tab you'll use for all of your general messages, including questions and comments for our speaker. We'll be breaking for questions several times during the presentation, so please do not hold your questions to the end. You can also send direct messages to a specific person by hovering your cursor over a name in the attendee list. One of those names is Technical Help, and that's the place to go if you run into technical problems. We're also monitoring Twitter for your questions and comments. Use hashtag NCCPSWebinar on Twitter. That's NCCPSWebinar. If you missed part of today's conversation, or if you want to see some or all of it again, this webinar is being recorded. The link will be available shortly after the webinar on the NCCPS Webinars webpage. And watch your email for a link to a brief evaluation survey requesting your reactions and comments on today's presentation. Please take a minute to respond to that survey when the link arrives. We do appreciate your feedback. And now for a presentation. In less than a month, we'll be recognizing the 14th anniversary of the terror attacks of September 11, 2001. Along with an enormous list of other changes, 9/11 has altered forever how we plan and manage security for large on-campus events. It's no longer enough to think about traffic, parking, crowd management, and an occasional weather-related incident. It's a different world today, and that world continues to evolve. To help us understand the new meaning of large event management and identify emerging best practices, I'm happy to welcome Richard Morman, independent consultant and retired Deputy Chief of Police at The Ohio State University. Richard, who holds CPP and CSSP certifications, is a 35-year law enforcement veteran who served in his Deputy Chief position at Ohio State for 10 years. He currently serves on the ACES National School Safety and Security Council and has vast special event security planning and management experience. He has presented at national conferences and is considered a subject matter expert on the topics of fan behavior and celebratory rioting, large venue security, special event security planning and management, and executive protection. He attended Ohio State, graduated from the Police Executive Leadership College and from the FBI National Academy, and holds a certificate in law enforcement education from the University of Virginia. Richard Morman, welcome to Campus Public Safety Online.
Steve, thank you very much for that great introduction. And I would also like to take this opportunity to say thank you to the National Center for Campus Public Safety for asking me to present on this topic that I'm very passionate about. And it is a very important topic. I want to talk about our goals for today. And that's to provide you with some current best practices for safely and effectively managing security for large on-campus events. But as we go along, I want you to also keep in mind that these practices that we're going to talk about are scalable. They can be applied to smaller events. And so today we're going to give you a foundation for planning events and also provide you with some available resources. And one final thing I'd like to mention before we get started, and just a little disclaimer, I will mention NIMS ICS maybe 2 or 3 times, but this is not a NIMS ICS course. But hopefully when I do bring NIMS ICS up, you'll see that it's actually an important part of planning. Our objectives for today is really to discuss the importance of planning, but planning also includes threat and hazard assessment, so we're going to cover that also. I will even give you a threat assessment tool that's available to help you form an assessment for your event. And that will lead us into risk management, and then we'll round it out by discussing event security itself and talk about physical security of the venue and some other things that you can do to enhance your venue. And we'll conclude with some great resources. Steve's mentioned already in his opening about the terrorism events on 9/11 and the way we all looked at security planning and management. And that really changed after 9/11. And I know a lot of us struggled with how to manage that and what to do with it. And as a result of those incidents and other information that's happened, Boston Marathon has happened since then. We continue to see every day, it seems like in the news, incidents that have been circumvented by the FBI and some other federal agencies. And most of us that have these large venues on our campus already know that U.S. Department of Homeland Security has identified these sports stadiums and arenas as potential terrorist targets. But I want to stress this webinar is not all about terrorism. What we do need to think about in our planning is taking that all hazards approach. So to get us started, it's very important for us to start with some definitions. Special event can be defined as any event where a large number of people are brought together to watch or participate. When you think about it, those of us on these college campuses, we have thousands of these types of events all across the country every year. Almost any type of event you can think of is held on a college campus. And private and public institutions are a resource for your communities, and they all seem to want to have events. I know when I worked at Ohio State, it seemed like every weekend there was 1, 2, or maybe even 3 5Ks, it seemed like, and that's a special event. Here's another definition, and this is the first resource I want to point you to. It's a FEMA Course, IS-15 Special Events Contingency. There's actually 2 different versions of this. It's available online. One version is geared toward law enforcement, but I would encourage you, even if you're in emergency management, fire service, or just event planning, to maybe look at both versions. They're very similar. But I put this slide up here only because the definition is a little bit different in that it places an emphasis on impact that the event brings to a community, not necessarily the number of people attending. So even though they're 2 different definitions, I think they're both important to understand. And then probably the 2 terms that are, I would say, the most misunderstood, you hear these used kind of synonymously all the time, and that's event and incident. And there's a simple way to think of these. So an event is something that's scheduled or planned, and we're going to be talking a lot today about event planning. An incident, the simple way to think of an incident really is something that's unplanned and requires some sort of emergency response. And if you look at the slide, there's a more in-depth definition, but just think of it. Event is planned, incident is unplanned, and your event may evolve into a full-blown incident, or you may have to manage small incidents along the way, just depending on the nature of your event. And now let's get into planning and managing. Special event security is unique because when you think about it, it creates this temporary workforce that comes together maybe just for one event a year. Maybe your university or community is having a country and western concert, and it's going to be one time. And most of the individuals involved in the planning and managing of that event, oftentimes they don't even know each other. They may meet for the first time, and you're creating this temporary workforce. And the same holds true if you're a NCAA Division I, II, or III university and you have a football season. You're going to play 6 or 8 home games. You're still going to have that temporary workforce, but it's important that this workforce is able to function as a team in both planning and management of that event. And it's also important for this team to be able to function if that event suddenly turns into an incident. And looking at the slide here, hopefully most of us on here have seen this before, but there is a lot of merit in this. If you fail to plan, you're really planning to fail. I've seen fairly large universities that have events year after year after year. They don't really have a plan. It's just because they've always done it that way. That's going to cause them to fail pretty drastically at some point. Planning, pre-event planning, is intended to assist you in developing your game day operations plan. And I want to talk about game day operations plan and also incident action plan. They're very similar. The real difference is that game day operations plan, I've also heard it called event operations plan. If you go around the country, different parts of the country, they call it different things, but it's your game day or event operations plan, and that's really developed what you should be working on prior to your event to help you manage your event. And that incident action plan is actually developed at the beginning of an incident to help you manage that incident, but they are very similar. I've seen some game day operation plans that look identical to an incident action plan, and that's why NIMS and ICS and event planning really go hand in hand. And that operations plan really is an outline for managing your event and any incident that might occur. And you have to think about occur just before the event, during the event, or even at the end of the event. And this plan should be developed for each individual event and should really be considered part of your overall existing emergency operation plans. If your university has a large emergency operations plan, or maybe just the venue itself has an emergency operation plan. So at the beginning of planning, you have to identify the stakeholders, and regardless if this is a collegiate sports event, maybe a community parade, a rock concert, a high school event, the sponsor or those that are really responsible for hosting the event, it's on them to bring together those responsible for public safety in the community. Also included on the planning team should be any agency that has a functional stake in the event. And what I mean by functional stake in the event, if you're a university, for example, and you have a public safety department and their staffing doesn't allow them to cover the whole event themselves and they have to bring in outside resources, whether it be police, fire, or maybe county emergency management or other, maybe state police, county police, depending on your location. Those are folks that have a functional stake in the event. And also you need to consider those surrounding communities that are going to be impacted by your event. And also, to avoid confusion and consternation at the very beginning of the process, the lead agency needs to be identified. And I'm here to tell you that this oftentimes falls apart because sometimes those entities that think they're in charge are not really in charge or not responsible to be in charge. And I've had the opportunity to go around the country and look at different special events and how they're set up and how they're managed. And oftentimes, and I'll say this even though I was in law enforcement 35 years, oftentimes law enforcement comes in and tries to take over, and they don't necessarily always have to be the lead agency, or should they be the lead agency. I mean, it could be a local emergency management agency, it could be a combination of a college athletic department or a college public safety department, or if it's a high school event, a high school administration and a local police agency. It just depends on what the event is and where it's located. The important thing is that once this team is together, there needs to be a consensus. And consensus doesn't necessarily mean there's 100% agreement on who the lead agency is, but it's imperative that the lead agency or lead individuals be identified at the start of the planning process. Now we're going to talk a little bit about NIMS. It's a good resource. Consider the best practice in planning and management. By now, most of us should be familiar with the National Incident Management System, specifically ICS, the Incident Command. And just what I want to say here about NIMS is that at the start of your planning process, you should be developing an ICS command structure just to assist you in your planning, to help you identify who needs to be on that team. Consideration should be given maybe even to using the ICS forms. If you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to check those out. And what I found is prior to 9/11, I was in large event planning, and after 9/11 and NIMS ICS started to evolve and we were all taking the training, we all stood back and said, wait a minute, we're already doing this. We had an incident commander, but we didn't call them an incident commander. They were the event commander. We had unified command because it was necessary for some large events that we had to use outside agencies. So these ICS forms will force you to identify staffing levels, radio communications, and that sort of thing. I just encourage you to take a look at them and see, and maybe you can adapt them and for your own event planning. Unified command, again, is for those events that need multiple agencies, and most of us around the country that have large events do need to use outside agencies. And that's sometimes, just going back to what I previously said about identifying the lead agency, sometimes you might have a university or a state university and the state police come in and they think they should be the lead agency. I don't really agree with that. If that university has their own police department, public safety department, that's who should be, in charge in conjunction with their athletic department. A little bit about command posts. Again, having the opportunity to go around the country, what I've noticed is that command posts are almost probably 90% of the time located in the venue. That's not a best practice. So you think about, you have your command post, or whether it be a unified command post with your incident commander and all the other command staff and maybe your athletic staff, all in that venue, and that venue goes down, there goes your entire command staff. So the best practice is that that command post is located away from the venue. That's not to say that you do not need some sort of field command presence in the venue, because you absolutely do. But that command post should be located away. And then a little bit about Emergency Operations Center, and that's a big consideration in the planning too. Go ahead and set that Emergency Operations Center up. Have your EOC staffed and fully functional. That's just a resource that will help you manage your event. And then they are in place if you do have a large incident. I see some places will set up the EOC, but it won't be staffed. That doesn't really make any sense. Go ahead and set that up. If you can't operationally do that every time, do it 1 or 2 events a year just to make sure it's working. That's a great training opportunity during an actual event. And now as we wind up this first section in planning, I just want to leave you with the following. You have to plan the plan, you have to staff the plan, and you have to train the plan. Practice the plan, which is different than training the plan, and then review and adjust the plan. And hopefully this will come all together for you in a little bit as we go along. So Steve, I think this is a really good natural place to stop and see if there's any questions out there.
Thanks, Richard. You are listening to Richard Morman on Campus Public Safety Online. Our topic today is Sports and Special Event Security Planning Best Practices. If you have questions or comments for Richard during today's presentation, type them into that line at the bottom of that pod on the left side of your screen that says questions and comments. We have several pauses planned for questions. Don't wait until the end. Just type them in immediately. Richard, can you give us some examples of who should be on a university's event planning team?
Well, and Steve, that's going to depend on what type of event it is. If it's, obviously, if it's an athletic event, you're going to have a representative from the athletic department, usually an assistant athletic director. You should have somebody from the venue there. Some universities actually have events in venues that aren't really theirs. They lease space off their campus. But at a minimum, if it's on campus, it should be your athletic department, somebody from public safety, emergency management, if you have emergency management. And then again, those people that have a functional stake in it. And that is, if you're using outside law enforcement, go ahead and incorporate them. And you may have some initial planning meetings just with athletics and other campus officials. If it's some sort of other special event on campus, it may be a sponsor you're working with, a student organization. And I would encourage you really to reach out to those student organizations, because it's been my experience over the years that oftentimes security is kind of an afterthought for these student organizations. So I would encourage those that are listening in today and participating to get to know their student organizations and some of those leaders that have events all the time, because you'll find yourself scrambling at the last second to try to do something.
Now, you've mentioned a number of different organizations, a number of different agencies that need to be involved in this activity. How do you decide who the lead agency is going to be?
Well, Steve, obviously, if it's a university event, it's your event. It may impact the outside community, and you hear that all the time, that, hey, this large football game is really impacting our community. They're functional stakeholders. They should be involved in there somewhere, but the lead agency is going to be the university. It's going to be athletics. It should be a joint partnership with athletics and public safety, whether it be public safety, law enforcement, public safety security, emergency management. It should be part of that team also, if your university has an emergency manager. So that university who's having the event is the lead. Now, if it's somebody coming into your university and leasing space or renting out your arena to hold some event, the university still needs to take a lead on that. Sure, they're paying the bill, whoever the sponsor is, and we have an election year rolling around here soon, and we always get hit with that a lot, and that's a whole nother seminar on on planning and managing those types of events, but the university needs to be really involved more than just that student organization, because oftentimes these political campaigns will approach a student organization as a sponsor, and that way they get the venue at a cheaper rate. But you need to get public safety plugged in there as soon as possible.
Thanks, Richard. We do have some questions coming in. We're going to save them for the next break. We will not lose them. Keep typing those questions in. But for now, in order to stay on our timeline, Richard, I'll let you continue your presentation at slide 16.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So although we've been discussing threats and hazards, this is still part of, although we're now discussing threats and hazards, this is still part of the planning process. And we need to think about an all-hazards approach, using that to determine what hazards, risks, or threats merit that special attention, and what actions we need to plan for. So I have up on the slide is the FEMA definition of all hazards and natural, technological, and human cause, but really what does this really mean? So basically threats and hazards to sports or special events are going to fall into three categories, and that's that natural, human, or man-made, technological type of hazards. And natural hazards, we've probably all experienced them in the past. We're talking about weather, such as maybe thunderstorms, lightning. It could actually be a flood or a tornado. I know there was an NBA basketball game a couple years ago that was impacted by a flood situation. Human-made hazards, that's either going to be, that could be something caused on purpose. It could be even criminal, or it could be a human error, something like a fire or some sort of explosion caused by a human error or on purpose. And then technological hazards really can be defined as some type of incident that results from an accident or a failure of a system, maybe even like a bleacher collapsing or something along that line. But the key to all hazards approach is that you look at your community's vulnerability to specific hazards. And if you're in the state of Hawaii listening to this webinar, you're most likely not going to have to worry about a snowstorm or a hailstorm, I don't think. Or if you're in the state of Kansas, you're not going to have to worry about a tsunami, but do you have to worry about tornadoes? Absolutely. But taking that all hazards approach really allows you to plan your resources to be dedicated to those risks that are most likely, and that's the key here, most likely to impact your event. You also need to consider the surrounding businesses and even the transportation infrastructure. I had the opportunity to be at a venue a year or so ago that the majority of their spectators arrive via public transportation, and that's not really too unusual in some of our larger cities. Also, events such as football, concerts, even motorsports, they have other events going on kind of surrounding the main event, such as tailgating or camping, and you have to take those into consideration too. Those are all vulnerabilities. And also, I think it's very important to be thinking about, as you're doing your planning, where do people gather before and after the event? This is something that's oftentimes overlooked in planning and threat assessment. Where do people get together prior to the event and after the event? And whether it be tailgating or some other gathering, where do they get together before and after? And now I mentioned in the beginning that I would give you a threat assessment tool to think about. And this is the Threat Assessment Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment Guide. It's a Homeland Security product. It's been revised. It was revised about 2 years ago. It's now easier to use, and this is a tool that's out there. I would encourage everybody to at least take a look at this and evaluate it. It may not be right for you, but I think it would help you in guiding doing the risk assessment. And this is commonly referred to as, we all know the federal government likes to use acronyms, and they call this the THIRA. And it's just a process to help you identify and understand risk. And it really outlines a 4-step process for you. And got the 4 steps up there now, but what you really need to remember here, this process it'll help you with what you need to prepare for. It'll give you the resources that are required to be prepared. And then it'll give you what actions or mitigation activities you need to employ to lessen or eliminate the threat or hazard that you've identified. And then it'll also help you identify what impacts need to be incorporated into your preparedness and planning. So it's really a 4-step simple process. Again, I would encourage you to take a look at it. Now this next slide, I would almost bet, if I had some sort of feedback, that this risk formula that's now up on the screen is, everybody should be somewhat familiar with this, and you see this in different places, but risk equals threat times vulnerability times consequence. And we used to see consequence as criticality, but in the last several years that's really evolved into consequence. And so once our all hazards assessment has been completed for this event, so our planning continues, and the part of planning we're on now is risk management strategy, and we need to develop that. So really to simplify this, it's just important to give you some more definitions. So risk, what you need to remember here is really the unwanted outcome, and it's from something, and there's that likelihood again, I've highlighted it for you, and consequences. So really, the definition of risk, think of it as a potential of some loss due to presence of a threat or vulnerability. So risk is a potential for that unwanted outcome resulting from an incident as determined by the likelihood associated consequences. So now, just a reminder, a threat is that natural, human, or technological caused occurrence. Or think of it as a threat as a person, place, or an idea that poses some danger to an asset, and that asset is your event that you're planning. And vulnerability really is defined as a physical feature or operational attribute. Vulnerability is really something that exposes you to a given hazard, a weakness, or absence of a safeguard, so you're open to attack, basically. And then consequence is really the effect of an incident or an occurrence. And again, you're going to have to balance that threat and risk management. So through the all-hazard assessment process, you're going to have to gauge what your vulnerabilities may be. Threats may very well often be unknown. Vulnerabilities such as weather and that sort of thing you're going to know more about, and maybe through your intelligence gathering operation you're going to learn about some threats, but you need to, addressing vulnerabilities is really more in our control. You reduce the likelihood of a vulnerability, harden a target, you're going to reduce that threat or thus reduce the risk. And what we mean here really is you may very well know, again, about that weather hazard and be able to take actions to mitigate that. But if you have someone planning a lone wolf attack, you may not know about that. So oftentimes, making your target less vulnerable may dissuade other things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So now I just want to give you some risk management strategies. And these I actually got from the Department of Homeland Security, but I've seen them other places. It's a very common, for example, risk avoidance pertaining to sports or special events. Think about maybe having a no-bag policy at your venue. So having this no-bag policy removes that risk of patrons smuggling contraband into the venue. Now, I'm here to tell you that I know that no-bag policy, they can still smuggle things in, and they do. I've been at venues that have no-bag policies, but this does help you avoid the risk. Risk control should be thought of really as deliberate action taken to reduce the potential for harm or maintain some acceptable level of risk. And that could be that you allow bags into the venue, but they're searched, and they can only be a certain size. Risk transfer is the most common thing thought of here is having an insurance policy. So if you have somebody that's renting your venue for some event, they may very well have a large insurance policy in case their event doesn't happen or something goes wrong. Also, risk transfer should be that you've hardened that target enough that when the bad guys come and look at it and they say, oh, you know, this is too hard of a target, can't penetrate this, can't smuggle things in, you've successfully transferred that risk elsewhere. So you can think of that in two different ways, but the most common one is having an insurance policy. And then finally, risk acceptance, and that's really just clearly you've made that decision that you're going to accept the risk. And oftentimes what organizations will determine that the cost of the risk mitigation measures really are higher than the consequences of the risk. Steve, I think this is another good place before we segue into event security that we can take some more questions.
Tremendous, and thanks, Richard. And for those of you who do have questions or comments, type them into the questions and comments area on the left side of your screen, and we will get to them during this break or during our final break that's coming up in a little while. Richard, Gary Crane asks, when tailgating, etc., is occurring around an event, and most people arrive by vehicle on streets not capable of handling the volume of traffic, what's best practice for staging for preparation of emergency response? Parking around and near the event is, of course, extremely limited. And I should point out that the previous National Center webinar by Kim Dude from last month covered exactly this area, and you can find that webinar archived on the National Center webpage. But for now, Richard, what's your response to that?
Well, tailgating is a problem. At the university I worked at, we make great strides in for lack of better terms, cleaning that up. But one thing we did notice, it really impacted the parking lot. So you have to have a traffic and parking management plan to get cars into the venue. But in tailgating, what we noticed is people would come very early, and the choice tailgate spots are around the perimeter of the parking lot because that includes the grass area, which they're not really paying for. So that displaces the rest of the people. So they're paying for that parking space, but they kind of start encroaching in the drive lanes, and we recognize that as being very dangerous. So we would have in our parking lots, we've used quite a few officers to do alcohol enforcement, litter enforcement, and we also enforce keeping those drive lanes open. So if they would see a tailgate where somebody parks their car, they set up their canopy, and now they have a whole gang of people around them, and you can't get emergency vehicles in and out, you have to police that. You have to keep those drive lanes clear. I've seen some venues that will stage a fire apparatus at their venue because of that, because it's very difficult to keep those drive lanes open. And it's going to depend on really the environment of the parking lot, the environmental design. Can you accommodate that? But hopefully that answers that question. You could stage that fire equipment right at the venue or as close to the venue as possible. I know most places have emergency squads stationed there and fire trucks.
And I'm going to squeeze in one more question during this break, Richard. Adam Roof wonders, how much operational control should or can the on-site field command office have before it becomes a liability? How can you best communicate the separation to your team?
So you have your incident command post. I'm sure they're referring to the practice of having that incident command post away from the venue. That incident command post should still be monitoring the event, and everything should flow through that incident command post. So there's not really a difference when you think about it. If that incident commander is in the venue, do they have to see the event going on? Not necessarily, especially most venues now have CCTV systems where you don't have to be there to see actually what's going on. You have a better view watching it on CCTV. So you still need to have that incident commander that's in charge of the overall event, but you have that field command person in the venue that's going to take direction from that. And if it's a command person, they may have a team that they're not really operating independently, but they're able to make decisions on their own. And if they need assistance, they go back to the incident command post. And does that answer that question?
Well, we'll find out whether it does. The asker can ask for clarification if necessary, but for now, Richard, we'll let you get on with your presentation at slide 27.
Okay, so now we want to segue into event security. And so once your risk management strategy has been developed, the event security plan is starting now to take shape. And this plan should be taking a holistic approach, keeping in mind the components of personal security, meaning your staff, your event participants, and your spectators. Information security, and what we mean by that really is the value of information about your event could be compromised, the operational security of your event, and the physical security of the venue in the surrounding area could even be compromised. Information security is very important. And the venue should already have a physical security plan in place for non-event hours. And if none exist, I would encourage you to highly recommend you to develop one for non-event hours. So you have non-event hours, but we're talking here about event hours. So now this kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about earlier, but things to be thinking about as you continue your planning is what are you protecting, Why are you protecting it? How will you protect it? And what's the likelihood? And there's that, again, likelihood term. What's the likelihood that something's going to happen? And what's the plan if something does happen? And this is just going to assist you in developing your staffing plan as you proceed. And again, remember the temporary workforce that we talked about. That's very unique. So really a key function when we talk about personnel security is that all personnel involved in working this event should be screened. Pre-employment backgrounds should be completed, and having had, again, the opportunity to go around and look at different venues and talk to different people, this is really a hot topic right now about how far do you go in screening and doing pre-employment backgrounds, where you should go as far as you can. It's imperative that you know who's working in your venue, especially when this temporary workforce is coming together. Oftentimes, our concessions are contracted out. Oftentimes those contractors use volunteers, say church groups or different other groups. You don't know who's in your venue, so it's imperative that you screen them and have some pre-employment background done. And I would recommend that if you're getting ready to renew a contract with your concessions company for your venue, make that a stipulation of the contract that everybody that works for them, including volunteers, have some sort of pre-employment background completed. And then you need job descriptions for each position, including security positions. And a part of that job description should also be post orders. And what I mean by post orders, if they're assigned to a specific location, it should spell out in that job description what are the duties of the person assigned to this position. And I've even seen some venues, and this is a real good practice, is to make a little card that just has an outline of what your post orders are while you're at that position. And that will help that person out if they're new there. It's also important to conduct a training needs assessment. And if you have these same events every year, and we stay with the football example, of course, so you have people coming back each year and maybe have worked those same positions every year, sometimes you're going to get new people in these positions. So it's important that you do a training needs assessment and make that part of your planning to train your employees. All employees working the event should receive a situational awareness training to enable them to spot and report unusual or inappropriate behavior. Several years ago, we started teaching everybody at the Ohio State University football training, the ushers and the ticket takers, and we discovered there was 1,400 and some extra sets of eyes and ears. So we would go in preseason and teach them basically to see something, say something. And that paid dividends. They would call things in, not necessarily what they thought was terrorism, but just situational awareness of unusual behavior or something going on in the venue that they thought they should report. And they also would share with you what are their concerns, so you get a lot of positive feedback. So you just incorporate that into their training. Training should stress that event security is really the responsibility of all employees, so all of your staff, just not law enforcement and security. It's a responsibility of game day management, from game day management to the ushers, to the ticket takers. You need to stress that. Event security is a responsibility of everybody. Now let's talk about positions directly involved in providing event security, after I told you it's everybody, but really law enforcement, fire, medical, and private and proprietary security, and additionally game day management from the event operations manager to ushers, ticket takers. They all need to be part of your security planning. It's also important that all levels of security positions train together and know their mission. I'll give a quote from an individual that does a lot of risk management type of training, and that's Gordon Graham. I seen Gordon not too long ago for probably the 5th or 6th time. He's a very good presenter. But he stresses every day is a training day. And I think you can take this and carry it over to your event also. Every event is really an opportunity to do some sort of training. It might be something as simple as recording the date and the time of your event, what the weather is like, and how long it takes for your arena for people to leave at the end of the event. And that's going to help you in your evacuation planning. I've been at venues before when you ask them, well, how long does it take people to leave here? And they don't know. And then you think, well, do they even have a stadium evacuation plan or a venue, arena evacuation plan? You can do other types of training, on-the-job training. You could take your incident command post that hopefully is not in your venue, but you can simulate the radio system going down. And I think most of the UASI districts around the country, they went out and bought this radio interoperability equipment, and it was to patch all radios and stuff together. Well, bring that on site and use it. See if it works. So again, every day is a training day, and you should incorporate that into your training plan. So the greatest vulnerability in information security is really your staff. Education, training, and awareness program must be developed to ensure that all employees really understand what information security is. This program has to cover information security policies and procedures, and if you don't have some, you need to develop some. So in addition to training and awareness of the different types of information, the vulnerability of that information, and this could be just your event operations plan. You don't want that thing, out and about. Now, if you're a public institution, some of that stuff may very well be public record, but I would encourage you to find out if it is and have your legal departments research that. But it's very important that you encourage and train your individuals on security of information or operations security. So access control. Access control starts outside of the venue, but it also pertains to inside the venue and also to restricted areas inside and outside the venue. It also applies to vehicles and individuals. And why do I say vehicles? Because there are some venues around the country that have parking either connected to the venue or actually underneath the venue. So either inside or outside the venue. So access control does pertain to vehicles and people. Now let's talk about physical security as it applies to sports and special events. And it really meets the same definition of industry for of security of other industries. So your physical security access control plan should consist of at least 3 perimeters. You have an outer perimeter, a middle perimeter, and an inner perimeter. And these 3 perimeters should create what we call concentric circles or concentric rings of security. So within those concentric circles of security should be several different layers of security. And this concept is also known as defense in depth. And we'll come back to that term here in a minute, and I'll give you a great example of what I mean, and hopefully it will all come together for you. So let's start with the outer perimeter. The outer perimeter could be something such as a buffer zone, should be established around the venue to the maximum extent possible. And oftentimes you're going to be constricted by your environmental design of your venue. But the purpose of this outer perimeter really is to deter vehicle traffic, keep vehicles away from and this will actually assist you in your traffic management plan also. So when you think about it, I know at Ohio State when we established our buffer zone years ago, that actually forced those officers that were directing traffic to screen traffic a little better, so only certain vehicles are allowed inside that buffer zone. So the best practices suggest that you maintain a distance of at least 100 feet from the venue out. That's, again, going to vary from venue to venue. And again, by environmental design, best case scenario, you don't have a parking lot within 100 feet, and you're almost good to go. But I've still seen venues set up like that, but they still allow VIP parking close by. And if you do that, that's not right or wrong. The preference for me would be not to allow it, but if you have to allow vehicles to park up close, and I understand the importance of donors and that sort of stuff, of campus, having been involved in campus for a long time. But those vehicles need to be screened in some manner, and you need to be able to identify that they have been screened. So back to the outer perimeter, though. So temporary block-off roads, a lot of barricades, different types of barricades are available. But if you're strapped for resources, consider using some of your campus trucks. When we first started at Ohio State, we used our campus dump trucks to set up a barrier. And they had quite a few different concrete decorative planters to set up, and they even look nice. I've seen buses used. I've actually even seen tractor trailers used with alcohol advertisement on the side. That was professional sports leagues that were doing that. But anyway, anything to kind of block that, to create that outer perimeter. Middle perimeter, and this is going to be your first level of access control for staff and spectators and the property that they might be trying to bring into your venue. So to gain access through this perimeter, individuals must have either a ticket or a credential. And something I want you to remember here is a ticket is for entry into the event. A credential is intended for access to a restricted space. And I'm here to tell you, I will admit, I know that a lot of times credentials are given out to maybe as a special friend or a favor, but really, if you need to be involved in a credentialing process as part of the planning process. And here I'm talking to anybody involved in event management, specifically public safety, get involved in that credentialing process. It is really important part of the access control plan. And again, this middle perimeter, once the venue has had a bomb sweep or other safety and security check completed, it's important that this middle perimeter is established, and that just helps you maintain the integrity of that security check that's been completed. Now talk about the inner perimeter. This will vary depending on the type of the venue and the type of the event. So let's talk about a sports event here for a minute. That inner perimeter really is going to be some restricted space, such as a locker room, the field of play, obviously, whether it be a field or a court. For concerts, the inner perimeter may be a backstage or a dressing room and a stage. So access to the inner perimeter is restricted to individuals that possess that credential. And again, we're talking about, and I can't say enough about the importance of this being included in the planning process. So access to the inner perimeter is restricted to that individual that has that proper credential. And then anybody that is staffed either the outer perimeter, the middle perimeter, or that inner perimeter, it's important that those individuals tasked with checking that credential have training. I would suggest maybe having a board made up with the different levels of credentials, and credentialing probably could be a whole nother presentation for another day, but the best practice I've seen is you basically have two separate credentials. You have a day of event credential and you might have a season credential, and then that individual credential will have different levels of hierarchy or different levels of access that you can gain. And it might be simple as just punching the level of access that credential could be, but it's important that those staff that are tasked with checking those credentials know what they're looking at and know what to look for. Now I said I'd come back to an example, and so I want you to, defense in depth, and I want you to think of the gate security and look at the graphic that's up there. So we start at the top on counter surveillance. So say your intelligence has told you that there's some bad guy out there or somebody that's going to try to bring something into your venue. We'll keep it simple. So counter surveillance is somebody that's out there is looking for maybe somebody that's doing surveillance on the venue. They're going to be out kind of in that outer perimeter looking back toward the gate. That's one level of security. Another level of security you're going to have is that security officer that might be doing your bag checks, or I know some of the professional sports leagues like Major League Baseball are doing metal detectors. That's just another level of security. Your ticket taker, that's also a level of security, and that's why it's important they're involved in the security planning and have that situational awareness. Next, you're going to have a police officer, and that police officer at the gate should be back away from the ticket taker and the security person and observing everything and being there to support them and intervene if necessary. And then another level of security that if you're fortunate enough to have CCTV system, that's another level of security. So defense in depth is really that coordinated use of all that multiple security countermeasures, to protect your asset. So as we get ready to wind up here, I'd like to bring a couple things back up. We talked about, really to summarize, you have to have that plan. You plan the plan, staff the plan, train the plan, practice the plan, and then review and adjust that plan. And during your planning process, you're thinking about what are we protecting, why are we protecting it, how will you protect it, and then what's the likelihood that something's going to happen. And that's going to be through that risk threat assessment. And then what's the plan if something does happen? want to give you some resources to start with. Program I got involved with a long, long time ago. Discovered this as a great resource, and if you have one in your area, and if you don't, I would encourage you to reach out to identify if you do have this, but that's the Protective Security Advisor Program. It's with the Department of Homeland Security. They can come in and help you do a threat and risk assessment on your venue. A very good asset. It doesn't look like there's a lot of grant money available right now. We did use this program 2 different times to procure money to enhance our security presence at Ohio State. The last one was a buffer zone protection plan in 2010. Hopefully some of that money will come back, but I know they're still available even if the funding is not there to get the federal grant for you. It's still a great asset to help you do that security and risk assessment for your venue. And we're talking about physical security things there. Also, the National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security, they have best practices guides, including one for intercollegiate athletics, safety and security. And you'll see in there a lot of things that we've talked about today, a little bit more in depth than I was able to go in the allotted time. But NCS4 also offers training and other security-related services for professional sports, interscholastic athletics, intercollegiate sports, and even marathons. And there's our website, or you could just Google NCS4. Another great resource is TEACS at Texas A&M. So the Texas A&M University System, it has the Texas Extension Service, also commonly referred to as TEACS, and also the National Emergency Response and Rescue Training Center, NERTC, as you know, we like to use those acronyms. So it offers extensive training on emergency and response and rescue training. And then there's a partnership that was formed a few years ago between TEACS and NCS4. And they offer 3 training courses. I would encourage you, if you have not had these, seek them out. You can actually bring them to you. These are coordinated through NCS4, but again, it's a partnership between NCS4 and TEACS. They're free. That's the best thing, and they're designed for your entire team to go through it as a team. So if you're a university, I would encourage you to get your athletics people on board, police, fire, other public safety entities, public health, all together, and go through this training together. And they have a sequence that you can go through all 3, but it's sport event risk management, sports and special event evacuation and training exercise, and sports and special events incident management. So again, that's provided by a partnership between the 3. Okay, Steve, I think we're at the point now we're going to take some more questions.
Tremendous. Thanks, Richard. At the end of the last break, you answered a question from Adam Roof about field command offices and wondered if you had answered the question. I thought I'd let you know that Adam says it was a great answer. Thank you. We have some other questions that we're going to take care of now. Here's one that might be answered by some of the resources that you just listed, or perhaps something else. Someone asks, is there a class that trains in event best practices that you would suggest on the East Coast?
Yes, well, you could bring the 3 that I just mentioned. You could bring any of those 3 to you. I see that oftentimes a county emergency management agency may host this training. And again, these 3 courses, I've got the slide back up there again with NCS4, if you can see it kind of blue on blue. Definitely, you could bring them to your venue. So if you're on the East Coast, bring it to your city. Talk to your university or whoever venue manager is. Maybe it doesn't have to be a university. It's whoever has special events can bring any 3 of these.
Now, there was an interesting dialogue going on in the chat room about emergency notification systems. A listener named Steve asked, does anyone offer an emergency notification text message availability during events only to mitigate possible live active shooter type notifications? To contain possible panic, or do they merely rely on PA systems? And then Jennifer Keegan pointed to a resource at Brigham University, which Steve looked at and reviewed and said was great. But I wonder, Richard, if you have anything to add to that general dialogue.
Yeah, what was the name of that resource? There's a lot of commercial resources out there for notification. One thing that we all struggle with is, so if you're a university and you may have faculty and staff and students attending your event that have signed up for your university's emergency notification, but the other several thousand people coming in, how do you notify them? There's a resource that I became available or aware of that's available through Homeland Security, but I don't think that's quite out there yet. So I would encourage if any of our other people listening in today know of resources. Quite a few commercial resources, a lot of texting systems, but again, how do you get that information out there? And then the struggle is also, how do you get it out to the tailgating and camping areas? And I think a major way to do that is through radios, and I mean the old AM, FM radios, over IP maybe, and over TV, because everybody has their satellite receivers out in the parking lots and TVs and that sort of stuff. But, so it looks like there's some information coming in now. I see Rave Mobile Security, definitely have heard of that. So anything else on that, Steve?
You're seeing what's coming up there, and if you have no other, if you can sort of glance at some of those as they come along to see if anything catches your eye, let me get to a couple of other questions.
Sure.
You mentioned taking a holistic approach to security planning. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, what I mean by holistic approach is really an all-encompassing approach. So we've talked a lot about, and this is a great question too. So we talked about how we used to only have to worry about parking and traffic and crowd management. Well, we still have to worry about parking, traffic, and crowd management, but we're taking that holistic approach. So how does traffic and parking affect security? I mentioned earlier about how when at Ohio State we started doing the buffer zone protection plan, it seemed like that actually streamlined our traffic management process, because what we used to get close to the stadium were cars that shouldn't have been there because they weren't being properly screened as they come in. But taking that holistic approach is looking at the whole thing. So looking at the whole, just not how do you maintain security at your stadium or arena, but how does parking play into that? How do these events, and I mentioned that everybody should remember to figure out where do they gather before your event and after your event? That's very important to think about. How do you secure that? Because we've hardened the target, the venue, most of us very well, but now the softer target is outside that venue somewhere. It could be out in your tailgating area. It could be a local street near the venue where everybody congregates to have an adult beverage before or after your event. So you need to think about that also.
We've only got a few seconds left. I wonder if you can squeeze a quick answer to this, and can you further explain what you mean by every event should be a training event?
So as I quoted Gordon Graham, and I would encourage everybody to kind of Google Gordon, and if you've never heard him, if you have the opportunity to do that, but every day is a training day. So every event, you should take an opportunity to practice what you've planned for. You can simulate things like, say you simulate your command post going down. You should have some redundancy built into your plan. So if you have an incident commander and in the unified command, every command person from other agencies, police, fire, emergency management, who is their backup? If that command post goes down, who steps up and where do they go? For instance, you could train, just make an announcement, the incident command post is now down. So you should have in your plan already what to do. So if you're the backup person, and if the instructions are you go to the emergency operations center, you go to your backup command post, or you call somebody or somewhere, you can simulate that during a game, and it's not going to hurt anything. And it's all in the timing. Obviously, if you have an event that's very, very busy and there's a lot of little incidents going on that you're having to look at. And I didn't really, Steve, this is a good place to wind up here. I didn't really get into after actions and that sort of stuff, but you should absolutely, after every event, regardless of the size, have a debriefing, have your supervisors debrief with your staff. That's commonly called a hot wash. And then bring that back and have an after-action debriefing of all the supervisors, and then make a formal after-action report. And you should get that out every year as you're starting your new planning phase, and look at that after-action from the year before.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks to all of our viewers and questioners from around the Internet. Check the NCCPS webinars webpage for a link to the recording of today's webinar, as well as a link to our speaker slides and information about future webinars. And watch your email for that brief evaluation survey on today's session. We read and act on your comments. You can mark your calendar now for our next Campus Public Safety Online webinar from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday, September 22nd. Gary Margolis will discuss the implications of social media on campus safety and security, the role of social media threat alerts. Watch your mail or visit the NCCPS webinars webpage for registration details. In addition to our Campus Public Safety online webinars, the National Center for Campus Public Safety lists a wide range of other events and resources. You'll find details on the web at nccpsafety.org. Again, that's nccpsafety.org. And I want to call your attention to one particular upcoming event that many of you will want to attend. From October 19th to 21st, the University of Vermont will present its 25th annual Legal Issues in Higher Education Conference, which includes a campus public safety track produced in collaboration with the National Center. Campus safety topics will include fair and impartial policing, trauma-informed investigations, crafting a campus prevention program, and social media in campus public safety. Conference speakers include some of the nation's leading experts in the field, such as Allison Kiss, Executive Director of the Cleary Center for Security on Campus, Lynn Hammer, Sexual Assault Prevention Manager for the U.S. Naval Academy, Dr. Gary J. Margolis, co-founder of Margolis Healy and President and CEO of Social Sentinel, and Stephen Healy, Managing Partner and co-founder of Margolis Healy. Make a difference on your campus and take part in this annual conference at the University of Vermont Davis Center in beautiful Burlington, Vermont, or join online via the live web streaming option. For details and to register, link to learn.uvm.edu/legal issues. That's learn.uvm.edu/legal-issues. Campus Public Safety Online is brought to you by the National Center for Campus Public Safety with support from the University of Vermont Continuing and Distance Education and the University and the U.S. Department of Justice. Special thanks today to Andrea Young and Dan Cardella. This is Steve Worona. See you next time on Campus Public Safety Online.